So Steve Burgess is a writer and broadcaster whose honors include 2 Canadian National Magazine Awards. Burgess is a contributing editor of the Tyee and an award-winning documentary director. He's the author of Who Killed Mom? And his stories have been featured in publications including Reader's Digest, Maclean's, and the Globe and Mail. And Tana Toraja is an arts reporter at the Vancouver Sun in the province, and she covers film, television, books, related topics. And they're going to be talking for about 45 minutes, and then they're going to take questions from you, the audience. So please start thinking of a very smart question. And remember that we're not auditioning for speakers for next season. And we also did some extensive research, and we found that there is no such thing as a 2-part question. So if you think you have a 2-part question, you actually have 2 questions. So pick your favorite one so more people can ask questions. Anyway, take it away.
I just want to say, by the way, that Jorge said that, you can come and go as many times as you want. Not a chance. I will stand up and stare. Everybody who goes out. So, yeah.
You've got some prop comedy to start with.
Prop comedy is just, let's say that Dana, did an interview with me. Here, look at that front page of the Vancouver Sun, and it says, "Police seek local man for online dating scam. Claims to be commercial pilot, author, CIA agent. Among those he fooled is Vancouver Sun and province writer Tana Toraja, who did an interview with him, which you will find with it. So, and now the scam goes on, yeah.
The scam goes on.
Yeah.
We don't have mic stands, so you'll get to see my mic technique. There is none. Let's just start. I wanted to say, because this is a book about traveling, I just want to say the outfit, the jacket. Folks, is that a travel type? I think so. I don't know where you're traveling to. I mean, to
this was actually
show in Las Vegas, perhaps.
Yeah, no, this is one of my proudest pieces of apparel, and it was actually purchased in Rome. And it's the kind of thing I used to. Some of you may remember, I used to host a TV show on CBC. That's when I had a little bit of money and I could buy things like this. Now, if I go back to Rome, which by saving my pennies, I go into this store where I bought this and I just look around. There's not a single thing I can afford to buy. But it's a very fancy store. It's called Empresa. They have stores for women and separate stores for men. They're in Rome. Empresa, it's very good. Shoes are from Rome too, so.
All right, now that we've got all that sartorial action out of the way, I'm guessing a lot of people probably here tonight know Steve's work from the Tyee and different things, and generally, and even if you don't, well, I'll tell you, he's a humorist, I guess, by trade, as we like to say. As you can just tell with the opening banter. And a traveler, and all of us have known Steve over the years. You've always been going off on adventures. Now, a humorist and a traveler, we would suspect that we would get a humorous book about your travels, but no. There's some funny bits in this book. I've obviously read it because I wrote about it, but there's some funny bits in it. But so I'd like you to talk about, the genesis of this and sort of the idea that you've kind of stepped away from, the set-up punchline stuff of your writing. And not to say this isn't entertaining. I'll get out of this hole now. Off you go. Tell us about Reservations.
You will find this book a gloomy slog.
Tana Toraja.
No, the thing is, it was a long process. My first book came out in 2011, and it's not like I wasn't trying to get another book in print. But I'm a fast writer and a slow learner. And it took me a while to kind of get it through my head that I can't just tell a series of funny personal stories. And I was actually having dinner at the Congee Noodle House on Broadway near Maine. It was closed for a long time. It's open again. It's a great place. And I was having dinner with David Beers, founding editor of the Tyee. And I was talking about the fact that I wanted to write a travel book. And I was talking about all the travel stories I have to tell. And he just said, you can't just do that. You can't just spin a bunch of yarns. That's not a book, or it's not going to be a really good book. You need to do more than that. And Dave and I had a lot of long arguments because I kept saying, well, Dave, I'm not a great journalist. That's not my strong suit. I'm a storyteller. And he was just, we actually had, as he will tell you, we had shouting matches. We had a lot of shouting matches. But he eventually managed to pound it into my brain that, yeah, you can do this. And I am the kind of writer who has to sort of sit down and start doing it before I figure out what I'm going to do. I'm not good at planning. And so when I started to write the book, I realized, oh, I can do it. I can do a book that's as much about reporting and about journalism as it is about telling stories. So just funny thing, after I sent him a draft of the book, Beers actually said, you know what you should do? You should put in more personal stories. Because he told me every chapter ought to start with a personal story. Not every chapter does, but most of them do. And so I said, who are you and what have you done with Dave Beers when he told me that? But anyway, yeah, so that was the genesis of it. It really was that dinner, and it was still took a long time before we managed to get a deal for it, but it was a question of what kind of book you're going to write, and it turned out to be a much more serious book than I originally envisioned.
Well, yeah, you've talked to quite a few experts about the overall topic, and the one I sort of want to move into right now is that, it's the famous Twain quote where he talks about how travel is important, or is fatal, I believe is the word, to bigotry and small-mindedness, and it's a longer quote, and I'm not going to muddle up a Mark Twain quote for you. But it seems to me right now that we need more than ever is to try to eliminate small-mindedness and bigotry. But we're also living in this time right now where we're facing the idea of wanting to travel, maybe wanting to experience other cultures, other people, get out of our own brains for a while, but the climate crisis, but the idea that if we travel long-haul flights, being Canadians, we all know that you got a long-haul flight to get anywhere, pretty much, right? So in your book, that seems to be the big thread for me in this, and I'm sure you're going to agree with me because you're supposed to. That's the big thread.
I know which side my bread's buttered on.
Trying to square that circle, and so let's talk about that a little bit. I mean, is travel now a guilt trip, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to go back to a quote from Mark Twain, because Mark Twain, it was harder to travel back then, and yet it was simpler. The simple part was you weren't messing with the planet. If you made the choice to travel back in Mark Twain's day, you were making the choice to broaden your perspectives. You were making the choice to find new horizons and really make yourself a better person. So it was a choice between being provincial and being a person of the world. But what you didn't really have to worry about so much is the fact that you are now dealing with emissions, you are dealing with over-tourism, you are talking about desecrating the sites that you are supposed to be celebrating. It's just a more complicated situation now than it was back in Mark Twain's day. And, that is, as you say, Dana, there's a few themes that run through the book, but that's one of the central ones is, can you justify it? Mm-hmm. Is it a guilt trip? Can you justify it? And spoiler alert, I don't come to any real conclusions because, look, if I sat here and claimed that I had come to some great conclusion, I would obviously be a giant hypocrite because travel is very important to me. And I don't think that cutting off travel, well, it's not feasible, but I don't think it would be a good thing. It's just that, what does that mean then? How do we change our behavior in light of new realities? How much of our behavior do we have to change? It's, on the one hand, you can say it's an individual choice for all of us, but on the other hand, it's a collective choice that we have to make. And yeah, I mean, there's lots of strategies out there. There's a strategy, one idea that's been floated is a progressive tax, so that you would have, say, your first flight does not get taxed, your second flight does, your third, and as this was Seth Wines from Concordia University suggested that by the time you took 6 flights or 7 flights a year, it would become prohibitively expensive.
Well, let's touch on that, because that's hitting a part that probably everybody in this room gets. It always falls onto us to pay for this stuff. You're talking about emissions. Well, you're going to stop the shipping companies that all this crap we order online, or you're going to military. Imagine what the American military emissions must look like. Who am I missing? Oh, the billionaires. $33 billion business last year were private jet, the building of private jets. $33 billion in 1 year spent. So while we all sit here, I don't know, is this a question or am I just ranting? While we're all sitting here, though, thinking, okay, I'm going to think twice about that, nobody's slowing these cats down. Right. So, you talked to a lot of experts, so I am getting to a point here, sorry, Steve. You talked to quite a few experts in this book as your active journalism, which you committed very well in this book. what did the experts say to you about this gap, about this idea that we're supposed to stop it, not
Different
the
things.
Kardashians?
Different things. Different experts said different things, but the one expert who spoke most clearly about this, because I asked him specifically about this, is a man who some of you might even know. His name is Dr. William Rees. He's local, and he was one of the two people, along with a fellow named Wackernagel, I think, who coined the term carbon footprint. He and, Marcus Wackernagel or something, or Marius, they were the ones who coined that term. And he is, Dr. William Rees is the most extreme voice that I have in this book. And he just says, look, I'm a scientist, I look at the facts. And what he says is he wants a complete ban on air travel. Complete ban on air travel. That's his solution. So I said to him, we did an interview, and then I got thinking about it, and I followed up with some questions. I said, look, you are never going to get the military out of the sky. You will never get government jets out of the sky. You will never get billionaires' private jets out of the sky. So how are you going to ban air travel? What you're really going to do is ban air travel for people like us. And his answer was, well, so be it. So be it. Life isn't fair. Life has never been fair. The rich have it better than us. It's always been that way. So that's not going to change. His point just being, we have to do something. So we have to do whatever it is that we can do. I hope that it's not just kicking the can down the road or anything when I say there's not a chance in hell of that ever happen. When you look at the fact that Pierre Poilievre is basing his entire political campaign on axing the carbon tax, imagine a party saying, hey, how about huge taxes on air travel so that you folks whose votes I am seeking will not be able to travel anymore. There's just no way politically you could ever sell it. So I think Dr. Rees doesn't care about that really. He's just like, well, I think that's what we need to do. But in the real world, there's just no way.
There's no way at all. And Jeff Bezos, as we were talking about earlier, he has to have 2 yachts
He has
because it's
2
so
yachts.
inconvenient because of his travel.
Well, by the way, in case you're wondering, this is when I was doing the research, you find out little things. Why does Jeff Bezos have 2 yachts? Maybe if you've heard about this. He's got a main yacht and an auxiliary yacht. Why? It's because his main yacht is so high-tech and so eco-friendly that he's got these 3 tall electronic masts that are, they're very eco-friendly. I guess they make his yacht a real eco-friendly, massive yacht. Unfortunately, they make it hard to land a helicopter. So he needs a second yacht to land his helicopter. Is it an eco-friendly helicopter? I sincerely doubt it. But so it kind of obviates the reason for having the eco-friendly yacht when you have to have a second yacht to land your helicopter. But anyway, in case anybody asks you, that's why he has 2.
It's very sad. I thought it was because he couldn't get under a bridge with one of them. But didn't he want to take down some famous bridge? Anyways, we're going about that. Getting back to the parts in the book, you talk about, things that can happen in the future. You talk about your travels. And one of the things, and where I did get a bunch of laughs out of the book, is looking at some historical records of travel. And my favorite part was the 1700s and the grand tours of the young swains. And I'd like you to share with the audience an English fellow, I guess you would call him a tour guide or tour expert or tour journalist, I don't know, but he had some very excellent traveling tips for the young swains. I would imagine you probably, very rich young English guys that got sent to the continent because God knows what they were up to at home. And off they went, and this is, so share with the audience.
Do you have it on there? Or
no, I don't.
I'll have to look it up. It's in here somewhere.
It's about the Germans.
Oh, do you want his capsule descriptions of various nationalities?
Or just give us something from him, because it's really great, because the fact that he had this whole in a guidebook to these young bucks that were on their way to, basically
what he did was
across Europe.
He wrote a 2-part book that was called The Complete Gentleman. And one part of it was basically how to conduct yourself back home, which was in jolly old England, I think. And then the second part was about traveling abroad and how to do it. And he was like kind of going to be your guide. And one of the things that's most famous about his name is Jean Gaillard. Gaillard was his name, the complete gentleman. One of the things that he was most famous for was his capsule descriptions of different nationalities in Europe. He had some nice things to say. He had, I have wrote here, some of Gaillard's themes will resonate with modern travelers, such as his rejection of fear. For if dangers ought to be so much minded, nobody must drink out of a gold or silver cup, because some were poisoned out of the like. Nobody go to sea, because some are drowned. So that take away dangers, there is no reward, no merits, nor virtue. So he also told people that it's a good idea to learn the local language. This can rid him of the surprisal others are subject to, who, coming into a foreign country and understanding not one word of the tongue, look as if they were fallen from the clouds. But anyway, he gets into a little thing at the end here about, he talks about different Europeans in different categories. In behavior, French, courteous. Spaniard, lordly. Italian, amorous. German, clownish. In conversation, the French, jovial. Spaniard, troublesome. Italian, complying. German, unpleasant. In affection, the French loveth everywhere. The Spaniard, very well. The Italian knows how to love. The German knows not how to love.
Had a tough time with the Germans,
Yeah,
didn't
like
he?
a really lousy Yelp review for Germans, yes.
Well, kind of this sort of early, going on travels and pointing out to people what they've seen and stuff makes me think of the influence today. And I know Jorge talked about that earlier, took a little bit of a shot at it. So, travel influencers,
Right.
yay or nay?
Here's the thing. This is one of the, there's no sense writing a book if you don't learn a few things and maybe have a bit of an attitude adjustment. I wrote a chapter about serendipity, which is what I prize so much when I travel. And I thought that the opposite of my approach, my serendipitous approach, the opposite is the bucket list. 1,000 places to see before you die. Get there, see it, check it off, go. And I thought, well, this is Instagram travel. This is influencer travel. Look, here I am in front of whatever. And, look at me. But I was talking to a woman named Dr. Ulrike Gretzel, and she was kind of slapping me around a little bit and saying, you're being too hard on these people, that a lot of influencers serve particular communities. They target themselves at gay and lesbian travelers, and they might be able to give gay and lesbian travelers a heads up on what jurisdictions are not necessarily going to be friendly for them and what places almost like in the olden days, as we know from there was the Oscar-winning movie, The Green Book, where black motorists in the United States needed the Green Book to tell them where they could stay and where they were going to have serious trouble. And as Ulrike Gritzel is saying, influencers serve that need, among other needs, for various people, and they will provide information. But she also admits that not all the influencers are equally responsible, and that some of them are, in fact, leading to harmful outcomes, because what they will do, for example, she mentioned one hanging bridge in Austria. I won't try to pronounce it. But they post pictures of this bridge, and the bridge has now been flooded with tourists. And what the pictures don't show is that, A, it doesn't really have a huge capacity, and also it's difficult to get to. And so there are people who have no idea how arduous the trek is going to be, are half killing themselves getting to this place, and then when they get there, they have to destroy it. So that's an example she gave of how the influencers can really, be harmful. But I really don't like the idea that I do think Instagram reinforces, which is that you go there and it's kind of like envy travel, you know. Look at me, I'm here. The main point is to show you that I'm here and you're not. And so, yeah, I mean, I really would rather just go somewhere and have no plans and wander. Yeah.
On the topic of going there and seeing places, which the Instagrammers do so well, sometimes it goes sideways. Thank you, Old Faithful. What about some places that you have in that you would say, and I don't want to use bucket list because I agree with you that, because it seems like that's a lot of pressure and probably a very bad movie with old movie stars. But tell me about some of the places like, you know, we'll use the word tourism places, tourist traps or whatever you want to call it, or some that you think, yeah, you should make the effort to get to, where you've thought maybe before, God. But are there some that you would say, you know, advice, Steve?
Well, I mean, even though these places are thronged with tourists, what can you say about Paris? I mean, you should go to Paris. You know, there's lots to see in Paris and lots of wonderful things to do in Paris. And it doesn't have to be the main things. There are things you are going to want to check off because there's curiosity. You're going to want to see things. It's like I'm stubborn. One of the problems is really I'm stubborn. I don't want to go to see the thing that everybody tells me to see, but sometimes it's worth seeing. Like I think it was my 6th trip to Paris, and I went to the Louvre, and I went, oh, okay, well I was probably pretty stupid not doing this earlier. But sure, I mean Paris and Rome. Rome is something to me. It's like Rome is a city that I love so much, but the thing is, get there, do the things you have to do as quickly as possible. Obviously, you're going to go to the Colosseum, and it's worth going to, and you're going to want to see the Pantheon and, you know, a few things. But then get that out of the way and just start walking and start eating and drinking coffee and going down byways. And, like, you know, I had, by the way, talk about serendipity. This is so wonderful. I don't think this is in the book. I'm pretty sure it isn't in the book. I was walking along in Rome, and somebody rode up to me and said, I know you. And I said, yeah? And she said, yeah, you hang out at Cafe Artigiano on Hornby Street. I was, you do know me. That's where I basically lived in those days. And then we got chatting. She was, of course, from Vancouver, and she told me about the Protestant cemetery, or the cemetery for non-Catholic foreigners, which is beside a 2,000-year-old pyramid. But one of the things I discovered later is a little quirk, is that they hand you out, every hotel hands you out a free tourist map. It's a little one-sheet tourist map in Rome. And the Protestant cemetery falls just off the bottom of it. So people don't know it's there. It's where the poets Keats and Shelley are buried. It is a place of just otherworldly beauty. It's full of stray cats. There's the famous Angel of Grief sculpture of the angel leaning over the headstone. Emmeline Story is the name of the woman in the grave, I think. Her husband sculpted the piece. There's a duplicate of it, I think, in New York. But that's there. Antonio Gramsci, the socialist revolutionary and intellectual, is there. It's just such a beautiful place. And again, I didn't know it was there till somebody told me. There's so much to see in Rome. There's so much to do. There's so many. I would absolutely go to Rome. Also, if you don't mind the hyper intense and somewhat polluted urban environment, I just absolutely love Bangkok. And I know a lot of people hate Bangkok, and I can understand why. Bangkok, crazy traffic, clouds of exhaust. It is, and bad smells sometimes. It is not always a pleasant place. But on so many street corners, random street corners, the best food you're going to find anywhere, cheap. People know what they're doing at these street places. It's safe. Bangkok is a place where I say, if you don't recognize something, you should eat it. Because you'll be okay. You got the ferry boats going down the Chao Phraya River, and of course the temples are there too. But it's just mostly the food is so wonderful. It's a great place to wander in. But it's stressful, and in and of itself, except for the temples, Bangkok is not beautiful. It's a lot of concrete and overpasses and a lot of traffic, so prepare yourself for that.
So the subhead, moving right along, the subhead on the book is The Pleasures and Perils of Travel. So I'm wondering, biggest pleasure for you about traveling and the biggest peril for you when it comes to traveling? I know that's a big, wide net I'm casting, but...
The pleasures are very much about wandering and discovery for me. Like I say, I'm a little bit perverse about it in the sense that I could read up more, and then maybe I'd know where I was going, but I would really rather just kind of do it myself. And so when you discover something and when you have a magical experience that you weren't planning on, that to me is the greatest. And the other thing about, I do mention this in the book, which is so wonderful, is that serendipity extends to your memories. That's the thing that always floors me, is that you say, oh, I'm going to go to this place, I'm going to go to this country and see this thing, but you don't know what is going to stick in your memory until you're home. And I have the most bizarre moments that are stuck in my head, and they're not things that anybody would identify as a highlight, but I will always remember this moment and that moment because it had some personal resonance for me. And so that's one of the great pleasures. Perils. Airports have a lot of perils in them. I can get so frazzled at times, so frazzled. And I get ashamed of myself. But I have been that guy in an airport where I lose it. And there's some poor employee, and it's not the employee's fault, but I am screaming at this employee for something. I had, on my last trip last year, I had a stranger, just say, calm down, mate. And I was like, okay, I'm calm. Just because there was some ridiculous line. It was set up so weirdly. And it's so, I have to go through this line and there's no Space Mountain ride at the end of it, It just, it's just, anyway. But, yeah, that's...
That's the peril. I think everybody agrees with that. The airports now, right?
And also, I'll tell you one thing. On this last trip, when I was doing for research for the book, I was on a budget airline. I think it's called Swoop. It's Singapore Airlines budget.
This guy knows.
Yeah. Well, world's worst website. Oh gosh. Well, I tell you, that's nothing compared to the flights. I was on in the middle of the seat. It was at over 7 hours, Tokyo to Singapore. They would not give you a free swallow of water. Over 7 hours, you had to pay for water. And I was in the middle, and the person, you can't really blame him if the person in front of me reclined. And I was reclined, so I couldn't even open the laptop, because I could open up the laptop that much. And it was 7 hours with no water in the middle seat with a person's head in my lap. And yeah, there's a peril.
Well, that leads in, because we were talking earlier in the bad trips, but bad trips, so that can mean a lot of things, couldn't it?
Yep. Had those.
Maybe you should have a trip on one of these trips. Yeah. Bad trips, though. One you want to remember, you mentioned Rome as being one of your favorite places, and I know that Japan is a favorite place, but you were mentioning that one of your worst trips ever, and I thought it'd be fun to share with everybody here, is coming to Vancouver when you were very young, moving here.
Yeah, it's funny. I came to Vancouver for the first time when I was about 14 years old. I was traveling with a friend's family. We were juvenile delinquents. We were long-haired punks. And what I didn't really bank on, though, was that also my friend's family was dysfunctional. He had a stepmother and a half-brother, and he wasn't happy about that. His mother had died. And I didn't realize that there was a civil war going on between my friend and his stepmother.
It's a Disney movie.
Oh, it was. I tell you, I wrote about this a long time ago for Vancouver magazine, but it didn't really make it into the book. But this is my first time in Vancouver, and I'm looking around at Vancouver. And one thing, by the way, when I look back, what really strikes me is I was 14, and I was from Brandon, Manitoba. I was from the prairies, and I was so resentful because I looked around and I thought, these people think they're so hip. These people think they're so great. And this place is supposed to be so beautiful. And when I realized, when I look back, I was thinking, these people are hip. This place is beautiful. you really do stick out like a sore thumb. And I was just, resentful. But anyway, oh gosh, what a trip it was. We took a train out. You know what? Honest to God, I'm sorry if I'm telling tales, but we did take LSD on that train trip. We actually, Al and I took acid on the train out.
The stepmother and the half-brother didn't
No,
join
this
in?
is, they were driving and we took the train and then we met them. But then when we were driving through the Okanagan, warfare broke out and I was stuck with this family. I remember at one point, my friend Al was taunting his half-brother just to get at his mom. And she turned around and started windmill flailing at him and yelling, I hate you, you son of a bitch. And I was there. And then the other one,
Were you scared straight?
I was just, you know what I was doing? We lived in Brandon, and I was like a mantra in my head. I was saying, Brandon, Brandon in my head until it kind of lost meaning. It became a meaningless syllable. I wanted to be home so much. But my favorite moment, this is true, this actually happened. At one point, another battle broke out. We're going down, this Buick is going down the road at 60 miles an hour in BC. And the stepmom turned and pointed at me and said, why is he always here when we fight? I was you want me to step outside? It was just a nightmare. So why am I even here? Like, why did I come back to Vancouver after all these horrible memories? But it gradually, Vancouver was a place that I started to go as a hitchhiker, because I was a hitchhiking kid back in the 70s when people did that kind of thing, young people. And I did hitchhike out here, and by myself, I was able to develop a real appreciation of it. I tell you, the one thing, on that first trip, we went and stayed on Bowen Island because they had relatives on Bowen Island. And one of the nice things is because of that sense of wonder and awe that I got from being at Bowen Island, I can still get that. Ride my bike out to Horseshoe Bay, it's a long ride, and then take the ferry over to Bowen Island, and I still get that feeling of being 14 years old, and just like, wow, what a place this is, That's the thing you always want to recapture. You have that sense of wonder and joy. It's hard to recapture that when you've lived here for over 35 years, as I have, but it's still there. It's still there.
Well, talk about that a little bit, because I know you like to travel alone. Some people might say that's weird, but I don't. I'm not going to judge. No, but you like to travel, as you spoke about serendipity, and obviously an itinerary and a tour bus is kryptonite to you. Yeah. But you readily admit that you're okay with getting lost, and you do quite often get lost. So if you may talk a little bit about that traveling alone, and just expand on that a little bit. And as you've done it more and more over the years, I'm sure you've had people that have said to you, oh, Steve, you travel a lot. Let's do a trip together. Oh, Steve, that sounds like fun. I want to come along. Oh, Steve, what do you say when people say that to you?
I'm just honestly glancing to make sure that certain people aren't here. Because there are people who you might know who have joined me on trips. And I am internally dying. I'm like, I don't want. Anyway, it isn't as bad. It doesn't turn out as bad, but I just groan because, I just don't want to have anybody saying, no, I want to go here. No, I want to do this. I just want to be free to do whatever the hell I want. And I understand that I have a tremendous privilege. And this is where, being a white male is a privilege. And
what?
Yeah.
Sorry, I was a bit gobsmacked by that.
No, yeah. I mean, and when you I try to be aware of the fact that I can travel alone, whereas it's not that other people can't travel alone, but they would have a harder time. They would have more concerns. So that I understand that is a privilege. But one of the things I was mentioning to Dana just a few moments ago is that it's not just when I travel alone. It's not just that I want to escape the company of other people. In a weird way, I realized I want to escape my own company. Because when I'm with someone, I'm talking. My foot hurts, or whatever. and I get sick of listening to that guy. I really do. It's like I hear myself talking and I think, shut up, shut up, shut up. And when I'm by myself, that guy isn't talking. I just got my stream of consciousness, which is much more pleasant. I prefer my stream of consciousness to my chatter. So yeah, I mean, I think that it's just more pleasant for me to be alone, to escape from myself. You can let your mind float, fly free.
Speaking of flying free, what about space? You want to go to space? That seems to be all the rage.
Not a chance. Not a snowball's chance. I was saying that my formula for do I want to do something or not, it's like, let's say I'm on a plane and God forbid things go wrong. It's a Boeing, for example, and
you're on the next to the
yeah,
door.
and down we're going. Would I say to myself, well, nothing I can do. It was worth it. Like I wasn't going to live my life on the living room couch. This was worth it. If I'm going to space or if I'm in the Titan submersible, no. Or even if I'm skydiving, it's like, are you kidding? I'm dying for this? I'm dying to go, because I went skydiving? It's like, that's the question I ask myself. How will you feel if it goes wrong? Will you feel like, was it worth it? And if the answer is no, then I'm not doing it.
You're not doing that?
No.
It's not on your activities list?
No.
Okay, but we're going to wrap this up. But the one question I'm going to ask you, and it's one I've ripped off from a Seth Meyers podcast, so I'll come clean with that. I don't know if you've heard that podcast, the Myers Brothers, where they go family trips, and they talk to people about going on family trips. I'll recommend it, because I'm sure we've all had family trips, right? So the question is, whom, dead or alive, and I know this is tough asking you because you just told us the joys of traveling alone.
Right.
Would you be willing to take a trip with? I know I would, but I'm just curious, like, who would you actually say, yeah, I'm down with that? Again, dead or alive?
The difficult thing is that what do you really know about people? What do you really know about celebrities? I just used to worship professionally David Letterman. But would I want to be on a trip with David Letterman?
God,
no. No, everything I've heard about him, he's not a guy you'd want to travel with. I used to be a tremendous admirer of Hunter S. Thompson. He's written about his road trips. Do you want him at the wheel and you as the passenger? Not a snowball's chance. So, I would name somebody, except that I've heard that this person, this would be another example, this person was apparently really bland in person, but to travel with P.G. Wodehouse and to maybe coax out of him some of the wit that he put onto the page. He is such I came to his writing fairly recently, but he is someone who will make you just absolutely belly laugh out loud. His writing is so, I have some of his phrases committed to memory. He talks Bertie Wooster. Bertie Wooster, his character, who's a bit of a fool, who's Jeeves looks after him. Bertie Wooster has somehow managed to get himself engaged to a woman named Honoria Glossop. And he doesn't know how. And he's desperate to get out of it. And he's describing Honoria Glossop's laugh. And Honoria had a laugh like a squadron of cavalry charging over a tin bridge. A guy could write that. I'd like to travel with him.
Well, the help would be good.
Yeah,
the service would be good.
Oh, if you could travel with
linens,
Jeeves.
The linens would be great,
That's
and so
right,
would
yeah.
dinner.
Not that suit, sir. No.
Well, I don't know. They might go for that jacket. Okay, folks. So Q&A portion of the event. So there's not mics up there. So if you want to ask a question, speak up, and or Steve will repeat it so everybody else can hear it. So, anybody got any questions?
Sir.
Yeah, thanks very much for the talk. It's been amazing. I have one question. What's your perception of time like when you're traveling? Has it changed?
What a great question.
Are you going to repeat the question?
Yes. What is your perception of time like when you travel? That is a great question. One line I think I have somewhere in the book is that every trip is like a brief life. It's like an entire self-contained life, and then it comes to an end, and it's like a little death when you go home. And when I am traveling and I'm thinking about how many days have passed, and then when I get home and I think, are you kidding me? 2 weeks just passed? And they go like that. travel is a way of extending your life because of the fact that time slows to a crawl. That's like almost like Einstein stuff, you know, in terms of relativity, because it's amazing how slow the time goes when you are on the road, as opposed to when you're on your couch watching TV, which I am a lot.
There's nothing wrong with that. Yes.
I read in the Sun, in the article in the Sun, that this year you're not planning to travel anywhere except to your home province
Right.
of Manitoba. What places in Manitoba would you recommend for someone who's never been there? A Canadian who's
Can you guys hear that? No, you want to repeat
So
that?
the question is, as I was interviewed by, who was I interviewed by? Oh, okay, it was Tana Toraja in the Vancouver Sun, and I mentioned that I'm not going abroad this year. I'm going to go to Manitoba, which is where I grew up.
Isn't that the Paris of the Prairies?
The Paris of the Prairies. You know what they used to...
According to Gord Downey, it is.
Well, do you know what I used to hear? Do you know what they used to call the Paris of the Prairies? Saskatoon.
Oh,
Saskatoon.
see, all right,
there,
so it's
somebody knows.
Saskatoon,
Yep,
I got
somebody
it wrong?
Saskatoon is the Paris of the
Okay,
Prairies.
see, sorry.
Brandon,
Sorry, Saskatoon.
I believe Brandon is the Brandon of the prairies. But that's where I grew up. And to go to Manitoba, if you haven't been there before, see, that's another fascinating thing, because, like, so the question, did I repeat the question?
No.
Where would you go in Manitoba? You know, where would you recommend that people go if they haven't been there before? The thing is, it gets to the heart of why we travel. When I go back to Manitoba, in a sense, I'm going back in time, because I'm going back to the places, the landscapes that I knew. And so if I said, I love going here and here, it's going to be meaningless to you because you didn't grow up there. But objectively, a place that I always go and rent a cabin, and I would recommend to anybody, is Riding Mountain National Park. They call it Riding Mountain. It's a mountain that's about the height of a dinner plate. But it's full of moose and bears, and I'm like, you've got to be careful. It is about 1 hour north of Brandon, and Brandon's in the south, so it's not really north. It's fairly easy to reach. The town, the main town, is called Wasagaming, and the lake is Clear Lake, there's a lot of Clear Lakes around, but this is the one in Manitoba. And we used to spend all our summers there as kids. So when I go back there, I'm going back to relive the experiences I had when I was a kid, but I can tell you also that seeing it with adult eyes, it's a wonderful place. And if you went there for the first time, it's a wonderful place, and it benefits from the fact that it's not near any big airports. So in a world of over-tourism, Wasagaming and Riding Mountain National Park is not over-touristed. And it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. So Riding Mountain National Park.
There you go. Anybody else? Questions? Oh, sorry, over there in the second row.
Yeah.
Did you begin traveling in structured fashions and then learn to allow serendipity to be your guide?
Did I begin traveling in a more structured fashion and then learn to make serendipity my guide? Pretty much. Put it this way, I started traveling with friends. My first trip to Europe was in 2002, and I was traveling with 3 friends. And you know, it wasn't a disaster. It was not a disaster,
Are
but
they still friends?
they are. But honestly, the fact that we are still friends is a credit to them and not to me. Because I was going to put this in the book, and then I kind of cut it out in the end. But it's like, before the trip, if you've got a group trip going, you're thinking, who's going to be the jerk? Who is the person who's going to turn out to be the real a-hole? And then one day you look in the mirror in Paris and you go, there he is. That's the guy. And what had happened was, it was a group, it was me and 3 friends, and we were making this plan for a European trip. Some of it is in the book because it includes my first trip to the polio. I have an entire chapter about the
That's very
polio
funny.
race.
That chapter's very funny.
And that was I do mention my friends in that chapter. So that is from that trip. But what happened was, when we got to Paris, there were supposed to be 3 of us, and then another person joined us who was a friend of a friend. And I didn't like that person, and I resented their presence. And I hadn't been on many overseas flights, and so I wasn't that great at dealing with jet lag. And I didn't know that person whom I resented well enough to get angry at them, so I got mad at everybody else. And one day in Paris, on the street, I just lost it and started barking at everybody and stormed off in a huff about something that I can't even remember. And then, like I say, the next day I was like, oh, God, you know, I realized I was the guy who was being the pig in the parlor. I was the one who was ruining things for everybody. So that's when I kind of went, yeah, I'm better off by myself. So, yeah.
Anybody else? Questions? There we go.
Yeah.
Great. Yep. Go ahead.
Over time, have you changed how you think about traveling to cities and traveling into nature?
Over time, have I changed how I think about traveling into cities and traveling into nature? I have. I will tell you that early on in my travel career, I traveled almost exclusively to cities. And that's one of the reasons is because that's easier to do with serendipitously. Because there's always somewhere to go in a city, and there's usually a travel infrastructure there. It's harder to go into the country serendipitously, and it's also, you know, climate and so on. If you're going to travel in the countryside serendipitously, you need to have a rental car or maybe a bicycle. More recently, when I've gone to Tuscany, I've started to rent bicycles instead of cars, finding that I can do it. It limits your range, but you can still do it. But over time, I've begun to realize that I'm limiting myself by just going to cities, because I've had some wonderful experiences in rural settings. And so, yes, I have been more open to traveling to, you know, destinations where I'm going to be spending my time in the countryside. Absolutely. Yeah, I used to be almost exclusively an urban traveler. It was just easier.
Do you travel light? What's your luggage like?
No, I don't travel light. I really should, and I don't. I used to have like a monster steamer bag that was just like killer. You could, you know.
Put a body in it?
It would be like a cat wouldn't even like it because it was too big for a cat. So, well, you know, cats like boxes, right? But this one would be like, nah, this is like a yacht.
I'm a dog person.
I'm getting out of here. But and then I started to downsize to a normal size suitcase of the sort that everybody has. And I use that now. But I just find it, there was a period when I was working for a film company for a couple of years, and the guy who ran the film company taught me how to travel with just carry-on. But the thing is, that only really worked when you were going somewhere for a couple of days to do a film shoot, not so much for a vacation. So I really wish I was a better light traveler, because it's better to be one, but I'm really not.
Anybody else? Any other questions? Oh, yeah, sure, go.
Do you have a optimum time and length in your mind about how long you want to?
I do, actually, yeah. It's do you have an optimum length of time for a trip? I'll tell you one thing. I used to run into these Japanese tourists. I would be gobsmacked, lost in both horror and admiration, because you'd meet a Japanese tourist in Madrid. How long have you been here? Oh, since 6 a.m. When are you leaving? Tomorrow morning. You know, they would do that. They would get like 2 days and they go to Spain, whatever. I do not want to rush anything. I hate being rushed. Hate it. So my optimum trips were always 6 weeks. And it helped because I was a freelancer, right? So I didn't have a job to go to. And also what happens is, when I started serious traveling, I should mention this, is when I got a TV show. And it was a CBC TV show, and it was only on for half a year. So then I didn't, like, it was CBC money, it wasn't big money, but I made enough money because I live very, very parsimoniously. I'm incredibly tight-fisted, shamefully tight-fisted. And so I had enough money so that I could travel when the show was off the air. That's when I started doing that. And then I would go for 6 weeks. Now, on my last trips, they were 5 weeks. And honestly, I think it's just because I'm getting old. Like on that last trip to Europe, by the time I spent a week in Paris, my back was just killing me. Because you can't tell for sure that you're going to get a good mattress. It's a crapshoot. And I was getting bad mattresses. I was trying to MacGyver the mattresses, where I was like pulling the mattress off and trying to sleep on the box spring and stuff. I really was crazy when I was in Palermo and it was in Trapani. I'm sorry, I was in Trapani, and I had a rented apartment. And you should have seen the setup that I tried to MacGyver, because the bed was just spongy. I thought, I won't be able to walk after 3 days. So I set up the couch, and I lengthened it with a kitchen chair, and I put the pillow on the kitchen chair and it was impressive, just because the couch was a little firmer than this sponge mattress. Well, but then there was nothing under that mattress except springs. Huh? No, it wasn't. It wasn't wood. It was like sponge, like foam on springs. Yeah, it was bad. And so, yeah.
I think the woman at the end of it, yeah.
I'm just wondering your thoughts about Airbnb.
Airbnb.
For travel, plus or minus.
My thoughts on Airbnb. Are you asking about the overall societal effects of Airbnb, or are you asking about how I personally feel about staying in Airbnb?
Well, specifically related to tourism, your own and society.
Both my personal and societal effects of Airbnb. I've only stayed in Airbnbs once, although on my most recent trip, it was weird because I was booking things through booking.com that I think were Airbnb accommodations that they had started to place on booking.com. I think the lines are starting to blur, because I had 2 or 3 accommodations that were more or less Airbnb in the sense that they were private apartments that I was staying in, but I booked them through online booking agencies, not through Airbnb. And I enjoyed those. But the only time I ever really booked via Airbnb was a trip I took down the West Coast. I stayed at an Airbnb in Portland and another one in Oceano, California. And I found it kind of weird. There were fights at the one in Portland. There were fights between 2 guests fighting over who gets the right bedroom. You don't usually get that in a hotel. And then I got stuck because the person parked behind me in the driveway had locked their keys in the car. And they had to call a tow truck driver or a locksmith. So that kind of stuff doesn't happen in a hotel. And then when I went down to Oceano, I was staying in an RV. But they didn't misrepresent it. I knew that it was going to be an RV. But so it was just a bit weird. I didn't love it. And in terms of the societal effects, boy, that's something I write about in the book. That is a real mixed bag, because you get people talking about how Airbnb opens up travel to people, to families and to people who might not be able to afford to travel otherwise, and that there's a real plus side to it. But overall, I think that Airbnb really has the capacity to unbalance the housing market. And in a situation where so many of us are dealing with high housing prices in Vancouver, I have to say that if I have to vote up or down on Airbnb, I tend to do a little downward. I don't mind people renting out their primary residences for Airbnb. I don't mind that so much. But it always metastasizes and it grows into situations where you've got, like in Barcelona, where you have Airbnb operators who have like 10,000 rooms, right? It's just basically an unlicensed hotel chain.
Right.
So
They're not paying anybody.
Yeah.
Time for one more question. Anybody? Going once? Going twice? Oh,
there we go. How far in advance do you usually plan to book your accommodations? How far in advance do I usually plan to book my accommodations? I tend to be a neurotic kind of person. Yep. And I book a long way in advance. Also, it's fun for me. It's like when I'm planning a trip, I plan a trip a long way ahead of time. And when you go, it's like when you got work to do, but instead you can plan your trip. That's fun. So I book months ahead of time, usually. Because, as I say in the book, I quote, Gustave Flaubert, who said, be regular and orderly in your life so that you can be violent and original in your work. And I feel that way about travel. Get your ducks in a row so that you can take off. Like, don't be in a situation where you have to scramble just to get a bed once you get there. be in a situation where you have everything set up, and that's when serendipity works, because you've got the bed, you've got the plane booked, and then you can take off. I wrote a long story, which I had intended for the Tyee, and it never got printed. Maybe it'll see the light someday, about a hilarious and horrible experience on my last trip where I had only one thing that I left to chance. I booked everything except I was going from Singapore to Georgetown, Malaysia, and I thought, you know, there's going to be so many options once I get there. It's going to be cheaper. There's going to be cheap flights and everything. Just leave it. And I didn't realize till I got there, I was traveling on the eve of Chinese New Year. And the travel agents just went, oh no. Oh no, no, no. No, there is nothing for you. And I ended up going to a bus company, and they went, no. But they said, there's another bus company. It's kind of like not the recommended bus company. He said, you know, you never really know with them, you know. They don't always have the drivers there and everything, but you might as well give it a try. And I went and talked to this woman, and the woman I booked with, she was so great. She was just so deadpan. And she didn't actually work for the company. She was working on behalf of the company I was traveling with, but she wasn't one of their employees, so she didn't have to sugarcoat things. And she said, do you want the 9 o'clock bus or the 8 o'clock bus? I said, I'll take the 8 o'clock bus. It'll get me there earlier. She looked at me and said, maybe. And she was right. Our 8 o'clock bus screwed up so badly with picking up passengers that we were back at the terminal after 9:30 when the 9 o'clock bus was leaving. And we were sitting there, I was going, this woman knows her stuff. And then it was 14 hours. We ended up changing buses in Kuala Lumpur, which I didn't know. Just all of a sudden, this guy came on and started barking. I said, what's going on? What's going on? Someone said, you have to get onto another bus. And it was kind of an interesting thing, because the worst thing about it was nobody could tell me how long the trip was going to be. I kept asking, when do we get there? Nobody knew. And so it's like, it was actually a really kind of an interesting lesson in human nature, because like a 14-hour bus ride, that's bad. But if you go into it knowing, oh, I'm going to have a 14-hour bus ride, you're braced for it. But when you go into it and you don't know how long it's going to be, that's a whole different experience. And it was like, it's just like at one point I thought, we're almost there. We're almost there. And then we pulled into a rest stop. A rest stop? You don't pull into a rest stop unless there's an entire other leg. And it's true. We weren't even close. And I was like, oh, God. Yeah, no, anyway. That was the one thing that I left to chance. And the gods saw that. The travel gods saw that, and they said, we shall punish this fool. And yeah, no, that was, yeah. Oh, God. That was not fun.
I think we're good to go, everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight. Steve's going to be signing some books over there. Upstart and Crower's selling some books.
Yay.
It's a symbiotic relationship happening. Thank you all for coming. Thanks.
I'll just say, the tickets for free to get in, but it's not free to get out. We're locking the doors. You need to see her to get your exit visa. Yeah. Thanks a lot, you folks. It was a lot of fun. And